TheBradRules!
Spamton G Spamton first appeared in Deltarune Chapter 2, and this demented little puppet salesman has fascinated me ever since. Spamton has quite a bit of dialogue, but the guy speaks in such an odd, corrupted manner, it can be a bit difficult to understand what this guy is all about. So let's dive in and explore the lore of Spamton and get to know him a little bit better. Spamton is an Addison, which are these guys who inhabit the cyber world and sell unusual merchandise. At first, they don't want to talk about Spamton when asked, but after you defeat Spamton, when he takes on his Neo form and you visit the trash zone where Spamton had his shop set up, they'll spill the beans one by one regarding his relationship with him. Spamton was certainly the most ambitious of the Addisons, driven by frustration as his products never seemed to land a sale. But apparently one day, Spamton made the right call, or someone called him, and started finding tremendous success, which even led to him getting a room in Queen's Mansion. I think it's quite apparent that the phone call in question was someone reaching out to Spamton. From here, Spamton's success started to plummet as the mystery caller stopped calling, and he was soon evicted from the mansion. Spamton had left the phone off the hook, and one of the Addisons mentions how he could hear garbage noise on the other side of the phone when Spamton left it off the hook, which not so strangely is the same description we're given when we try to make a phone call from our cell phone when we're in the dark world. The noise it refers to is the same noise we hear during entry number 17 from Undertale, which is linked to Gaster. So come on, we all know Spamton was obviously talking to Gaster. Gaster was responsible for his success and probably toyed with Spamton as a weird sort of experiment that ended up with Gaster abandoning him, and Spamton then being in a worse state than before he was contacted, as he is now living in a dumpster, and his storefront is now reduced to being in the city dump. This sounds like a similar scenario to Jevil in Chapter 1, in which Sham tells us about a strange individual who started talking to Jevil and drove him to madness. Jevil ended up being locked up by Sham due to his over-the-top insanity and thirst for chaos, just as Spamton ended up being relegated to living in a dumpster. It's not really stated that Spamton was nuts before he connected with the mystery caller. Maybe he was, or just a little eccentric. He was still always talking about making it big one day and being obsessed with success, but it's safe to say whatever craziness he may have had was probably amplified by talking to Gaster. The other question that arises is why Spamton is a puppet. This is never talked about on YouTube, and if it was previously, I have yet to hear it. But seriously, Spamton became a puppet at some point as he looks similar to the other Addisons, but is obviously quite shorter, and, well, the other Addisons aren't puppets. It's kind of obvious to me that Spamton wasn't a puppet to begin with. Spamton became a puppet as he was a puppet of Gaster's guidance and manipulation. Perhaps Spamton made a deal with Gaster to become a puppet to accomplish his goals and finally become successful. Even after their collaboration was done, he is still a puppet, trapped in this symbolic state. He is now worse off than when he started. He was an unsuccessful businessman, but at least he had friends. He had a storefront in the city and wasn't a puppet. He was a regular Addison. Now, he's been reduced to a failure. He experienced the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. It's certainly a case of be careful what you wish for. Spamton is constantly talking in internet advertising terms, and when he tries to talk too far beyond that, he is censored by certain terms such as hyperlink blocked. When he talks about the night, he cries out in forgiveness as if he broke a rule and is talking out of turn. It seems as though Spamton is bound by rules that probably have something to do with the business arrangement he had with Gaster. It's pretty terrifying. Imagine trying to talk about something, but there are terms and conditions to everything you say. His freedom of speech is severely limited. Spamton asks at one point when you're in his shop, "Is anyone there? Help," as his glasses go static, in a particularly unsettling moment. Then he nervously exclaims that he didn't hear anything, but then says, "But it sounded like they were talking to Chris," which is bizarre to say the very least. Is that the real conscience of Spamton calling out for help? Spamton has a desire for freedom and he is desperate. He is not inherently a bad person, but his desires to be successful lead him into being seriously manipulated, as he probably gave up all his sensibilities to make it big and become the big shot he strived to become. Now that it has all come crashing down as Gaster abandoned him, he is now desperate for something else, the desire to get out of his unfortunate situation. It's pretty poetic how Spamton manipulates Chris into helping him get his new body, taking advantage of his willingness to help. Spamton manipulates Chris just like Gaster manipulated Spamton. Both of them are not free, and Spamton seems to recognize this in Chris, even trying to include him in his plans. Even if he plans to absorb Chris's soul once he gets Chris to accomplish his goal of getting into the Queen's basement to get a hold of the machine, and he realizes he is still not truly free. Throughout the fight with Neo Spamton, Spamton still tries to convince Chris to become one with him. It's funny to think, but can Spamton tell Chris is not in control? Yeah, Spamton might say anything to try to convince Chris to give him his soul so he can be free, but the fact remains Spamton knows how this is and how it feels, and he might be demented, but we do see that even in the midst of his insanity, Spamton recognizes his predicament and might be able to see that Chris is experiencing something similar. Spamton might recognize his predicament and might be able to see that Chris is experiencing something similar, making him the perfect partner and the most likely to be convinced. In the end, Spamton is touched by Chris and company cutting the wires supporting him, believing Chris is helping him obtain his freedom. But after the final wire is cut, he realizes his new form is not sustainable. Spamton admires your strength and decides to join you and become a part of you in a very fitting reversal. He becomes either the puppet scarf or the deal maker, which you can equip. Spamton wanted you to join him and become one, but now Spamton has become part of you instead. He now belongs to something bigger than himself, and he seems to realize he would be better served in this capacity. In the Snowgrave route, Spamton's motives change due to the change in the story, and Spamton ends up taking over Queen's mansion during all the chaos. He alters the portraits in his own image and filling it with his beloved Pippuses. Spamton doesn't want Chris to join him, but rather he wants to stop Chris from sealing the fountain so he doesn't lose what he's gained. Spamton never stated in the normal route that he had his sights set on the mansion, but it's possible. But it seemed like Spamton probably wanted more. Spamton probably could have taken on Queen's minions and easily dispatched them. Spamton's end does not feel as satisfying here, as he certainly is more powerful than he is in the normal route, but he ends up becoming victimized by Noelle's ice shock. It's even revealed in Chapter 3 that Spamton can actually still appear in his original form, and seemingly his sanity, or part of it, has been restored. So he might still be a puppet, but it seems as though Spamton now has a purpose and received a form of redemption. Spamton only makes a brief appearance in an Easter egg scene in Chapter 3, where he recognizes Tenna, but Tenna doesn't recognize him, mostly due to his puppet form. Things come full circle here, as we heard one of the Addisons mention how Spamton talked about being on TV. The game version of Tenna talks about his relationship with Spamton and how they had a falling out and how Tenna was going to put him on TV and make him a big star. But Spamton took off when he received a phone call, which sounds like the final phone call he had with Gaster. He mentions that he left the phone hanging, and if you get a Z rank, you can actually see this room where he left the phone hanging. I guess no one could be bothered to hang it back up. This is the same scenario that Addison described. This brings into question how the Addison was able to hear the garbage noise on the phone when he lives in the cyber world, a totally different dark world. Unless this is not the same phone, but it's pretty suspicious. And Tenna himself mentions that Spamton could have taught him about email, and now that Spamton is out of his life, he's behind the times and things are changing too fast for him. And if it wasn't for Spamton, he wouldn't feel so outdated. So you could see that Tenna blames Spamton. And another little interesting tidbit is when Chris approaches the fountain in the Snowgrave route in Chapter 2, Spamton compares Chris to a game show host that is going to take everything from him right at the good part. So you could see that this was clearly about Tenna, and we didn't know that back when Chapter 2 came out. And now things have come full circle, and we now see what this line was all about. We can even see that Tenna even set up a prop that looks like Spamton, but the eyes are strategically censored. Looks like this set was originally going to be for Spamton's TV appearance that was planned by Tenna. I'm a bit surprised that Spamton has no comment to share when the evidence of Mike is called into question in Chapter 4, considering that Spamton seems to have a bone to pick with Mike, going so far as to call him a criminal. This seems like a missed opportunity, to say the least. But it's also possible that he could have been talking about Tenna, but it's kind of unclear the way he frames the dialogue. Spamton is such an intriguing character and quite tragic. The character is striving to get out of his predicament and accomplish his goals, and in the normal route of Chapter 2, he certainly can be seen in a sympathetic light. He was manipulated, wronged, forgotten, and ignored. Chris gave him more attention than Spamton had received in a long time and became bizarre acquaintances. In the end, Spamton didn't get quite what he wanted, but he became something bigger than himself. So guys, that just about does it for this video. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. What are some of your Spamton theories? What do you think about mine? I'd love to discuss it in the comments below. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bells to get all notifications when I post on my new videos. I want to thank all my subscribers for your continued support. And thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.